Thanks, Andy. Hello, everyone. Hope you are doing well and safe and during those times. We are going to talk a little bit today about what happens after you find a hit from one of the MMM plates. So we're going to talk then, as I said, what happens after we get a hit, after you have done a screening of one of our MMM plates. Of course, as you can imagine, the final aim of the project or the whole process is to identify a robust, efficient, and cost-effective adsorbent that can be used in your process, of course, at production scale. The very first step that you might have taken is to screen the MMM plate for a possible candidate. But then the question is what happens in between those very extreme steps, the initial screening and the production at scale. So I want to fill a bit on that gap. So the first thing that we're going to do is to watch a brief 5-minute video that just goes over the MMM plate. I expect that some of you are familiar with it, but just in case there are people that have never seen it, this video goes over it in general. Okay. So you screen the library using the conditions that are best suited for your process, the feedstock. The way it came with all the contaminants or impurities and competing proteins that you had. And then you saw one or more hits that bound your target. So next slide. And so just to recap what the library is formed of. We have, you've seen that there are different zones. Each one of the zones has a different character chemically, but the base chemistry that we use is a triazine base, and you, on the left side of the slide, you can see a schematic of the chemistry. The triazine chemistry allows for the attachment of two different or the same molecules with different characters. So you can put something with that is more hydrophobic, and another side is more electrostatic, and the combination of those two positions add the variability to the ligands. So that's the chemistry. Just to give you an idea, what we have in the MMM plate is a combinatorial library where the two characters or the two components on each side of the triazine are different. That's the central part of the MMM plate. The sides of them have the different characters as what we call bis ligands, which means that both positions in the molecule have the same compound, the same character. So on the right-hand side, you can see that by keeping the same amine, the same character constant, either on the columns or the rows, we just produce a combinatorial library that has different characters. Each well has a different combination of materials that offer a different ligand. So next one. So because each, as I said, each row and or column has just one common compound, they behave in a different way. And these are different examples of patterns that you can find once you do your screening. So if you look at the panel on the top, you see that there are specific structures that seem to display good binding. So in those examples, the red color denote high binding, while the blue one, it's poor or no binding, with the purple being in between. So you're really looking for the compounds that have high or very high degree of binding, so the red ones. And you see that it's fairly well distributed. There's not a zone that has more of the good binders, but there are specific compounds that are at least one of the branches of the triazines that seem to be interesting. So you can see in rows D, F, and H, there's a lot of binding. And then column 11, which is the bis ones, seem to be interesting too. Because the hits are distributed in the different quadrants of the ligand, this is giving us more of a trend in terms of which ones are more interesting, but not one specific that would be more promising. So we would have to look at that, and I'll go into more detail in a second. In the middle panel, you can see that that's essentially the same thing. There are fewer of the red ones, but you can see that the better ones tend to concentrate on the bottom part of the plate. And that means that what is common about those two quadrants is the presence of cation exchangers on one side of the molecule. So this is a trend that we would like, we will probably explore a bit more once we have the next steps. On the bottom panel, you can see that there's a lot more concentration of positives, let's say, in terms of where all of them are in column 6, which then tends to signify that whatever amine we put on column 6, it's really making a difference. And you can see also that the amine, the compound that we put in that is common in column 6, is also present as a bis material. So the two sides are the same, and that will be in well D11 as well, and you see that one is a positive too. So that gives a lot of puts a lot of weight on that specific compound and its combinations. Next one, Eddie. So what do we do with after you take a look at the results and study and interpret the results that you obtain? So if a certain compound shows consistent results, such as what we saw in the previous slide on the bottom, which is reproduced here, you can investigate its use as the bis ligand, which is the one in D11 that I mentioned. That is an adsorbent that has both sides of the triazine with the same compound. Or you can investigate its use in the combination with the other compounds in the MMN plate. So the different materials that are present mostly in column 6. If you obtain more of a trend, of course, before I move on, there could be an extreme case of the left-hand side where not the whole column is lit up, but one or two specific ones are there. And of course, then that narrows down your focus even more. So you probably would use that specific compound, that adsorbent in, let's say, well B6 for further development or at least investigation. But those are, the more extreme cases. On the right-hand side, when you have more of somewhat of a trend, but there's more positives in the play, you can choose to either investigate the performance of the positive ligands, at least a few of them, there are common traits on them, or explore more of the chemical space around those positive results. And this is done by doing additional screenings, either using the same library, but more stringent conditions for screening. So you might put, a higher salt concentration or change the pH to take a look at which ones are more resilient. Or we can make and produce more tailored libraries that are made based on the results that we obtain, and exploring the chemical space around the positive results. So it expands in some respects the number of screens, but concentrates the chemical space or focuses more on that chemical space where we already found positive results. Next slide, please. So once you have done those things, either more screenings or a bit more testing, you're going to have to make a decision what and how you want to proceed. So what are the tools that you have to make this decision, really? On the MMM plate, there are things that are relatively, straightforward and easy to measure, such as target binding. This is what we shown there. But there are other things that you can measure, such as what was the total protein binding. You have the different fractions, flow-throughs, elution, different washes, and even strips if you want at the end. So you can work on total protein binding too. You can do initial elution conditions where if you know what you want to use and you want to make it more strict, so you can very well do step elutions and check which one not only bound but eluted your target protein under conditions that you would prefer. You can look at recovery as well, although you have to be careful with this because there's a limited amount of material that you can practically pass through the microcolumns. And also, of course, you can look at the binding of specific impurities that you don't desire, and you can use that as a parameter for decision making as well. One thing that it's good to remember is that the screening is performed using very likely the same base matrix that we would use in commercial scale. So all the adsorbents present in the MMM plates are made using our agarose base matrix, which is the same one that we use or chemically similar to the variations that we can use at commercial scale. So the results that you get at the MMM plate in some respects are applicable to the development. There is typically not a big difference between the results in the beginning and what you're going to get later on in the development process. So another thing that is interesting is that the screening is done using the conditions that most likely reflect your process. So you are not required to change your feedstock, for instance, to accommodate the library. The idea is that you receive the library and you use your feedstock as it is to find one of the ligands. So this gives, of course, makes it more applicable to your real life final conditions and avoid you having to change your feedstock to accommodate some limitations. As I mentioned, you can make the conditions as stringent as you may want or need. You're really looking for something that works in that plate under the conditions that you want. One caveat that I like to make is that the format is not ideal to determine, of course, dynamic binding capacities because you are not regulating flow. So you have to be careful with the results and try not to overinterpret the results in terms of capacity, especially dynamic binding capacities, because it's not really the numbers that you get there are not the real numbers for the optimized adsorbent. So if you determine those different things is when you really can make a decision on which ligand to use to develop your adsorbent. Next one. So to summarize essentially how the next steps following the screening of the MMM plate, you obtain your results, then you get back to us, you contact Astrea, and you can obtain a relatively small sample of each one of the adsorbents that you would like. So we typically would provide 5 to 10 ml of selected heats. Those can be used either on another, you can choose to put those in plate format, or you can choose to put them in small columns. we can supply as slurries or pre-packed in small columns too. So it's something that there's a lot of flexibility in terms of the presentation format for this. So then you probably would expand the testing a bit. At this stage, of course, you would be able to determine the dynamic binding capacity. You can take a look at better elution conditions, uses of gradient. You, of course, would be able, if you're using columns, to regulate flow rates and all that. So it's a bit more, let's say, sophisticated. And then if that is showing promise and it's working very well, at that point, we could work with you and engage with you on a full development program. That's then essentially how we would move forward with it. Keep in mind a few things. The good thing about working with initially with the MMM plates is that you don't have to transfer to us any information or your feedstock for us to perform any of this. You would be doing that in your own lab at your own pace, using the conditions that you need. And only when you identify something that you think it's at least promising is that you really would engage with us in terms of receiving more material and later on producing your desired adsorbent. So there's this flexibility. It makes very easy. We don't have to involve have contracts and all that complication before you have some degree of faith or hope for success in the whole program. Next one, Andy. So just to give you an idea, I'm not going to go to details on the development program, but depending on the performance of the lead candidates that you have found, we can develop one of the candidates into a fully supported affinity adsorbent. Of course, that's what we really do. But in some cases, depending on how it works, we can engage on further screening. Either we can do that in-house and expand the search for a candidate that fits better the performance parameter that is required, including using computational chemistry tools to refine or try to target better what we are trying to do. Or try to accomplish. And that also could involve wet lab experiments. But that is something that the MMM plate does not necessarily preclude us from engaging in that kind of program. It is just a first step that might find something that is directly applicable or might require a bit more work, and that's something that it needs to be discussed. We are always open to discuss with possible clients and partners. So the development of the final adsorbent itself involves a few of the optimization of a few parameters. Most likely, we are going to work with ligand density. We can use different spacer arms depending on how the binding works. There is some flexibility on the base matrix. As I mentioned, our preferred material is agarose, but in some cases we have a few other base matrices that can be used. The attachment chemistry is something that many times we at least try to optimize, and also the performance parameters, among other things that many times are particularities of your process. Next one. So this is what we are really aiming to do. This is just an example of the purification of plasminogen from blood plasma using one of our affinity ligands. And you can see the chromatogram, a very nice sharp peak, and the SDS page on the other side, on the right-hand side, showing the concentration of plasminogen at the end. It's just an idea of what we aim to obtain at the end of it. Next one. So just as take-home messages, I hope I didn't take too long, but just keep in mind a few concepts, if you will. The MMM plates, they allow for the screening of a selected and focused number of our ligands for target capture. This is not a complete library. This is very important to remember. This is a library we designed to give a somewhat of flexibility, cover a large chemical space, but it has restrictions in terms of size. It has, at the end, 64 combinatorial ligands plus a few bis ones. But the advantage is that it does not require transfer of methodologies, materials, or any of the confidential information for the use. So it gives you that flexibility to take a look at what the technology can do for you at your own lab, using your own materials. Everything is controlled by you. By using the MMM plate, you might find a suitable candidate, but you should at least narrow down the chemical space for additional screenings. And the good thing about this is that you can start your ligand development program with a much higher degree of confidence in that you are going to find a suitable ligand. So with that, I'll try to answer some questions or any questions that might have been submitted. And I thank you all for taking time off your schedules to attend this seminar.
That's great. Thanks, Patrick. So yeah, just to remember, if you have any questions, please use the chat function and we'll try and get to your question. I have a few questions for you, Patrick. I think you've maybe answered some of them through the presentation, but just to sort of clarify, if somebody was to obtain a very good hit on the plate, could they obtain bulk absorbent of that particular ligand? And how long would it take to maybe get around about a liter of absorbent?
So we can provide 5 to 10 mLs in about 2 weeks. For about a liter, it takes a bit longer. I would say 4 to 6 weeks maximum, but that could be done too. We don't keep them all in stock, so because there are just too many of them. But it's in small scale. It's just a week or two. In a larger scale, like 1 liter, I would say 4 to 6 weeks maximum.
Okay, that's great. Can the plates be used as a flow-through step?
They can, yes. Flow-through step, as in they will
not capture the target, but
they can. Yes, you can. As I mentioned, you can screen for, let's say, impurities, so that you want everything else to be or something specific to be captured, and maybe your target just pass through. You are going to collect, once you do your screening, you're going to collect in different plates the flow through, whatever elution you want, a strip or a wash, a rinse, a strip. So you can very well look for your target protein, or your target, and any other impurity in the different collection plates. So yeah.
And again, I think you covered this, but the screening plates look a good tool. If somebody gets a hit, can they get a single absorbent in the entire plate?
Yes, yes. It can happen, and we can provide some of it, yes, for further tests.
I've just got another question here. I'm not sure you can answer this one immediately, but does the concentration of cytokines, or would it be affected due to non-specific interactions on the column?
I don't know. I would imagine, based on character, that there are some ligands that, or some adsorbents that might bind cytokines. But a priori, I don't know which ones would be, but it's possible. If that is a parameter that is important for your process, that's one of the things that during the screening I would try to monitor and exclude, if that's what you want, those adsorbents.
Okay, then there was another question about the cost of these plates. Perhaps I could take that one. So you can get a single MMM library plate for around £400, but don't forget that does give you access to 2 or 3 small volumes of any hits that you do obtain. If you want that, more cost effective is to buy 5 plates, which comes in at around about £1,100. So there are different options there. I think the last question we got, Patrick, relates to the ligand structures. Is this something we can disclose? And what would somebody need to do in order to be able to access the ligand structure?
Okay, the ligand structures of the specific ligands on each one of the wells is not something we disclose at the stage of the screening of the MMM plate. This is something that you have access once we have some kind of agreement, either as a development agreement or some kind of study. For that is what we are. We would have to have a more fixed agreement to disclose before we disclose that.
Okay. One final question, Patrick, relating to the use of vacuum on the plates. Is that feasible, or is that needed?
It's not necessary. I would say that there are setups where a gentle vacuum might help just to start the flow. But they are, if you look at the video, and I think I mentioned this, the first thing that we do is to put the plates after opening on top of a paper, adsorbent paper, so that by capillarity starts the flow, and then it starts dripping. You have to check if it's dripping properly, but if you keep going like this and adding buffer on top of it, it tends to keep dripping. You can use one of those setups that apply a gentle vacuum, and that will work too. You might use that to try to stabilize the flow rate, but the correlation is a bit iffy anyway, but you can use.
Okay, that's great. I think that's all the questions we have, Patrick. So thanks very much. And thank you everyone for listening in. As I mentioned, we have recorded this webinar. We will upload a video with sound, although as I mentioned, it's only background music, so you haven't missed anything by not being able to hear the sound. And we have another presentation in a couple of weeks' time. I think this is on endotoxin removal and why it's particularly important. So look out for news on that. And likewise, if you'd like to promote that you've listened to our webinar or you attended our webinar, there is an opportunity to win your own MMM library plate. So again, if you want to share your experience on LinkedIn or share with your colleagues. That would be great. And there'll be a draw around about the end of June for an MMM library plate. So again, thanks everyone for joining. Don't forget the email address if you have any questions. Otherwise, take care everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.